Hi everybody and welcome back to relative clauses and relative pronouns. This is part 3, the last video of the series. And here we talk about the different types of relative clauses, the defining and the non-defining ones, and in the second half of the video also the so-called contact clause. Let's start with two examples. This is the boy who won the race. And second example, this is Peter who won the race. Now, to make a long story short, who won the race in the first example is a defining relative clause, and who won the race in the second example is a non-defining relative clause. And now let's look for the differences. Now you notice right away in that second example there's a comma, and that is important. Non-defining relative clauses always have commas between them and the main clause. But outside that comma difference, of course, there's also a difference in meaning. In that first example, this is the boy who won the race. My defining relative clause adds essential information to the main clause. It's information without which I couldn't understand the main clause. We needed to identify the boy. Leave it out, then you have this is the boy. This is the boy is a grammatically correct sentence, but meaning there is none, so we need the defining relative clause in order to be absolutely sure which boy it is we're talking about. Second example, this is Peter who won the race. Now the moment I say this is Peter, Peter is already clearly identified, so the information in my relative clause is not necessary. Non-defining relative clauses are so-called extra information sentences. This is Peter who won the race. Essential information in the defining relative clause, extra information in the non-defining relative clause. Let's continue with a couple of examples, of course. Jim, who we met yesterday, is very nice. Now, first of all, you got your commas here. And the moment you say Jim, the identity is clear, so we have a non-defining relative clause. London, which is the capital of England, is a large city. It's important to know, of course, that London is the capital of England, but here, which is the capital of England, is still extra information. It's not needed for the identity of London because it's got its identity already in the name. It's also important to note that that is not possible in a non-defining relative clause. You can only use the relative pronoun that in a defining relative clause. So it's London, which is the capital of England, is a large city. And a third example, she couldn't read, which surprised me. Now you remember that comma which combination from the second video, and you know that the which here refers to that whole sentence, to the whole fact that she couldn't read, and we need a non-defining relative clause. You need a comma. She couldn't read, which surprised me. Alright, so much for our examples, and now we can actually go for a definition. A non-defining relative clause gives extra information about a noun whose identity we already know. Mr. Simpson, who we met yesterday, seems very nice. We know Mr. Simpson, the identity is clear, we know his name. It needs commas, and it does not allow that. So much for the non-defining relative clause, and we continue with the defining relative clauses, and we've had so many of them throughout that whole series of videos that we can start with the definition right away. A defining relative clause identifies or defines the person or object that we're talking about. It identifies or defines the person or object, or maybe the animal, that we're talking about. A seaman is somebody who works on a ship. My relative clause here, who works on a ship, is needed for a definition of the seaman. If you leave it out, a seaman is somebody you've got nothing left over. It's essential information, and it is not separated by commas from the main clause. Alright, I really guess that's all we need to say about the defining relative clauses. The difference between the defining and the non-defining relative clause should be clear by now. And so we continue with the contact clause. The town that we live in is more than 600 years old. Now, from what I've just told you, you know that we live in is a defining relative clause. There is no comma, and we have that in it, which isn't possible in a non-defining relative clause. Let's make a contact clause. Here it is. The town we live in is more than 600 years old. We live in is our contact clause. We've thrown out the relative pronoun, and the subject of our defining relative clause here, the we, makes direct contact to the main clause. And this is the definition of a contact clause, pretty much. A contact clause is a defining relative clause without a relative pronoun. It must be a defining one. You cannot make a contact clause out of a non-defining relative clause. It's got to be without the relative pronoun, and the left out pronoun must be the object of the relative clause. That's important. Let me show you. This is the bike I bought yesterday. What have we got here? We've got a defining relative clause, no comma. The subject-verb combination of our relative clause is I bought. So the left out pronoun here is which. And it is the object, of course, because the subject is here. This is the bike I bought yesterday. I bought yesterday is a contact clause. Leave out the object. Another example. The man you saw at the party was Giorgio Armani. Same thing again. Subject-verb combination. You saw. This is your left out object here. It would be who. The man who you saw at the party was Giorgio Armani. Who you saw at the party, a defining relative clause. Throw out the object and make a contact clause. It even sounds nicer than the defining relative clause, the full defining relative clause. The man you saw at the party was Giorgio Armani. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, and now I have one page left over. Commas in relative clauses are absolutely important. They matter. Two examples. German students who don't know English very well often spend their holidays in England. It's a pretty straightforward sentence. Only the German students who don't know English very well often spend their holidays in England. My defining relative clause identifies my German students. Alright, it goes to the German students. Let's put commas in and see what happens. German students who don't know English very well often spend their holidays in England. Now the meaning is completely different. Now I'm saying all German students don't know English very well, and they all spend their holidays in England. First sentence again. German students who don't know English very well often spend their holidays in England. Second sentence. German students who don't know English very well often spend their holidays in England. The meaning is different, so be careful with those commas. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. I guess now you know everything you need to know about the relative clauses and the relative pronouns. Thanks for watching. Bye bye and have a good time.